Welcome back, everybody, to Neutrality Studies. Today, again, with the American journalist and writer, Patrick Henningsen. Patrick, welcome back.
That's great to be with you, Pascal.
Great having you again. Before we start, where can people go to find your work?
Our main website is 21stcenturywire.com. If you could visit our YouTube channel, that would be helpful. We're very suppressed algorithmically, and also on Substack, patrickhenningsen.substack.com. It's another outlet. You can see some of my work there.
I will put it into the description below, but now let's dive right into your recent work. Actually, you went after the question of what drives migration, and you looked a little bit also at the rallies on the right and the left. Can you give us an overview of what you've been working on in the migration issue?
Yeah, this is a really important issue. I think it's driving a lot. It's reshaping politics. I can speak about Europe, of course, the UK, the United States also to a degree, but very different there. But really, it's become a kind of a crisis right now politically in Europe, in the UK. And so the question was, and we've been looking at this for a long time, and now you can kind of see the whole story is kind of coming together. What are the real causes of migration? So what's causing the angst? What's being used by right-wing parties and the emergence of reform in the UK, for instance, which is like a single issue party. It's about the small boats coming across the channel and nothing else. No economic policies, no foreign policies, nothing. Just stop the boats, stop the immigrants, and very anti-Islam. That's the basic platform. You find this in Germany as well. You'll find this in other right-wing parties in Europe. And so that seems to be the collective mass. But you really drill down and you find we're asking the question, what are the causes of the migrant waves into Europe? And it doesn't take long when you start to analyze the various migrant waves. I've been on the ground covering this in the United States on the U.S.-Mexican border, specifically the migrant crisis in summer of 2014 and 2015 during the Obama second term. That was a huge story. So I've learned a lot about that, plus being on the ground in the Middle East, Lebanon specifically, seeing the fallout from the Syrian war and how the various migrant waves coming out of war zones, what path they take in order to get to Europe. Lesbos in Greece, flashpoints like this, entryways into Europe. The Hungarian-Serbian border is another flashpoint. So I've been studying this for a while, and it doesn't take long to come to the obvious conclusion that if you look at all of the major migrant waves and you study the statistics, which we've laid out in this article for the column Quarterly, a new UK magazine, which has just been launched in 2026. And you can almost identify all of the major migrant waves that correspond with NATO interventions. And quite obviously, the big ones are Afghanistan. And then you have the dirty war on Syria, which a lot of people won't class as a NATO intervention, but it absolutely was. This was Turkey, the United States, the UK, Netherlands, Germany, France, among many other countries, just actively involved in the destabilization of Syria and the arming of what they called moderate rebels at the time. But the end game, of course, was to destabilize the country, to overthrow the government. It took them over 10 years to do it, but they eventually have done it. But in the meantime, it created a forced displacement of people from Syria through Turkey. And we'll get into the interesting aspects of this in a minute, which we discovered. But Libya is also very consequential because Libya was the safety valve for migration from sub-Saharan Africa into Europe. And Gaddafi said as much before his demise. He said, "You get rid of me, that's you're creating a whole world of problems for Europe." And of course, the bombing and the decapitation of the Libyan state and effectively turning it into a failed state has been basically a thoroughfare of migration into Europe from Africa. And so you have these convergences of these various migrant waves coming into Europe and tertiary waves that are based on, like, say, Afghanistan, a lot of Uzbeks, Tajiks, people from the stands, as they would call in Central Asia, would come into Europe as a result of either the war, the economic destabilization, or sanctions as well. And the same with these other flashpoints that we've talked about there. So there's a direct correlation there. So you'll find that in many ways, and the Israeli issue is also driving this too, because NATO foreign policy, to a large degree, and U.S. foreign policy from Iraq was a big driver of migration into Europe as well at the time, as was the Yugoslavia war, the breakup of Yugoslavia. And so this is a huge driver. Israel also plays a huge role in the architecture of the U.S. foreign policy. And U.S. foreign policy is NATO interventionist policy.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, your article, you're also making the point that this creates kind of a self-reinforcing feedback loop, doesn't it? The more wars you have, the more migrants you have then especially in Europe, the stronger the right, the more support again for Israel. And can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, that's an interesting feedback loop, because you'll find Israel on both sides of that feedback loop. You'll actually find them on three sides. It's an interesting issue. So Israel embarked on a very bold initiative. Probably we can trace it back to at least 20, 25 years ago, which was to create an alliance with the European right. And this has been a sort of, I think, a probably very long-term project, but to de-radicalize the right in Europe, in the West, to go from being where anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish sentiments were sort of at the core of that extreme right, to then flip that to make them Zionist, basically. And I would tell you that the most shocking and perhaps the biggest watershed moment of this, in my opinion, was the Breivik mass shooting, the massacre in Norway in 2010. He was an ardent Zionist, and the target of his attack were young labor in Norway who very pro-Palestinian. And that created a kind of a political chilling effect on that issue for a while, even in a country like Norway, and a lot of fear that sunk into that issue. And the Breivik was also associated with the EDL, the English Defense League. At the time, Tommy Robinson was the head of that organization right before he carried out this shooting. There's no evidence that he had communicated with Tommy Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, by the way. It's Tommy Robinson's a stage name. But the fact that Breivik was in association at the time before the shooting with the EDL, he identified as a Templar, very much Christian crusader iconography he's adorned with in a lot of his personal photos and effects. So you can see this idea of this convergence with Israel's very, I think, probably pretty happy to see the reemergence of this new crusaderism and Christian nationalism in Europe, because it does suit and it justifies their position as well, because Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders are kind of seized on this. When they're talking to the European right, they say, we're fighting them over here, so they won't come over there. We're defending the gates of Vienna, effectively.
Yeah. Hey, very brief intermission because I was recently banned from YouTube, and although I'm back, this can happen anytime again. So please consider subscribing not only here, but to my mailing list on Substack. That's pascalotta.substack.com. The link's going to be in the description below, and now back to the video. Yeah, I think he literally said something to that extent. And the people you're talking about is of course the Christian Zionists, of which you have like different flavors, and the ones in the United States are of course the Pete Hegseth types, and they all go back to their iconography with the tattoos. They all go to the Knight Templars and so on. It's like the Crusader spirit, actually, although whatever they understand as that. Now in Europe, though, like the thing is, you have these two strains in the right. You have the right that actually goes along with all of this, and they are Christian Zionists. And then you have the right that doesn't like it, that actually says, like, if we shouldn't do wars in West Asia, because if we don't bomb their houses, they don't come. Which there's a good part of the AfD, actually, the P in Germany, you know, this new right wing party that is actually pro peace, and they're mainly pro peace to a good extent because they're anti immigration, but they have, I think, the correct analysis. It's like the more we destroy these people's homes, the more they will come over here. Can you speak to that a little bit, where we are on this end of the split? And Tucker Carlson, I would say, also belongs to that kind of right, conservative, let's say conservative tradition. Where are we there in the United States and in the UK, which you've looked at so deeply?
I would call that the intelligent end of the right wing, or the what we call ostensibly the far right, which is the anti-interventionist, or let's say the anti-war wing of that. Certainly someone like Tucker Carlson, even though he's from America, he echoes and articulates those sentiments and gives the reasons why. So this is a sort of a more critical analysis. It's more logic-based, more historically based, less emotional, and much more pragmatic, much more along the lines of Ron Paul conservatism,
Yeah.
libertarian sort of Scott Horton type foreign policy in America. So, I mean, the problem is they're getting sort of forced out of that conversation, or even that movement. I think they're in the extreme minority, because what's happened is there's been a massive infusion of money into this movement in Europe and the UK. That money is coming directly from people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, the founder, the people who have founded, run, and who are behind companies like Palantir. It's kind of a new kind of the technocrat right wing, and it's hard to avoid the conclusion of the sort of fascist trajectory of that whole equation. But it's interesting that the money's coming from America, and then the speakers at the rallies they'll fly in people from America, or they'll pipe in Elon Musk, who's really driving home sort of ethno-nationalist themes, and also they're playing the Christian card. I mean, Tommy Robinson, his recent rally in London, it was all about Christianity. They had piles of giant crosses that people could then put over their shoulder. I mean, it was people carrying these giant crucifixes, dressed in chainmail, with the cross of Jerusalem apron over the top. I mean, it's just kind of insane when you think about it. But
Where did you see that?
that was in central London this Saturday. So you can go on social media. So they're really harnessing, the cross of St. George, the Templars, the Jerusalem cross. This is a holy war. So that reflects what we see in the trends in the U.S. military. This is one of the reasons why Pete Hegseth was chosen to be the defense secretary. The Israeli lobby really like him for that reason. But beside the point, they're really injecting this Christian nationalist, that England is a Christian nation, Germany is a Christian nation, and these people haven't assimilated, i.e. the Muslims, therefore they need to go, or we need to, at the very least, stop any new Muslims from coming in, because it's destroying the Christian character of the country. So they're really moving aggressively, and the money is backing this ethno-nationalist, Christian nationalist sort of new shape of the far right. And so they view what Israel's doing as kind of God's work, sort of holy work there, in terms of the genocide of Palestinians, even though you have a large percentage of Christian Palestinians. But this basically doesn't register at all with right-wing people. They don't. I personally, having many conversations about this, they're completely ignorant that the fact that they're Arab Christians either in the Levant, in Lebanon, in Iraq, even in Iran, Armenian Christians, it just doesn't register with them. And that's a different conversation we could have about the character of, the U.S. as a colonial settler state, and Europe as well, and their mentality, and how they view the Orient, you could say.
But it all mixes, it all comes together, or mixes together, because like one of the most bizarre things about Elon Musk is, of course, that he on Twitter's, like, he rallies basically against, African immigration to Europe, right? Being himself an African immigrant into the United States, but they obviously don't perceive themselves as such, or that doesn't register within that group. I mean, eh, how important do you think is the really stupid old racism issue in order to kind of wrap our minds around this part of the political spectrum?
Well, we have to come to grips with this issue, and we have to be able to some degree deconstruct it to find out exactly what we're looking at, okay? And what you're looking at with the anger, so there's a couple of conspiracy theories that have infused themselves into the discourse here. One of them is the Great Replacement theory. You probably heard of this. And so the sort of current usage of Great Replacement theory, i.e., and this is what the likes of Tommy Robinson will say. He said on stage this on Saturday. He said they're trying to replace us, the white Christian, original people of these lands, these Christian lands. Okay, they're trying to replace us. So this is Great Replacement theory. And there's a French author who I think had a book called The Great Replacement in 2011, Renaud Camus. Okay, and this has been seized, his kind of argument or thesis, and a lot of times they just repurposing this, probably not the exact argument that was made in the book, but this always happens, and they're running with this. And the other one is there's a white genocide. Elon Musk is very aggressively
Yeah.
pushing this. So it's kind of, if you want, on an intellectual level, it's laughable, because a genocide would be one group trying to, wipe out another, but who is wiping out the white population of Europe? Obviously, nobody's killing, the Muslims aren't killing white Europeans. It's a demographic issue. And
Especially
yeah,
especially for people on the left, and I am on the left. It's like, it's just hard to hear that, because really the only race that ever managed to completely eradicate the races of 3 other continents and replace them with their skin color is really the white Europeans that did
of
that to
course.
3 other continents. That's the only, and they had a name for that, and it's called Manifest Destiny and so on, right? And that's the great replacement. Um, but then thinking that this is now will be done to them in reverse, I mean, it just seems to me that these people are afraid of what deep down they know their grandfathers and their forefathers stick to these others. Do you think that something like that plays into that, or am I over psychologizing stuff?
There could be something like that on a deep psychological level, and what you're seeing, this expression, is a type of cognitive dissonance reaction to it. But I don't even think you need to go that deep into the psychology. Where the angst is coming from is the change in demographics.
Right.
Okay, and there's a great book by 2 Canadian authors, Daryl Bricker and John Ibbotson, and it's called The Empty Planet. And that was published in 2019, 2018, 2019. It really just shows you the long, irreversible, in some cases, trends and demographics around the world. And, the birth rate in white Europe, and that includes the UK, and I'll say this also includes white North America, it's fallen off the cliff. It's fallen off the cliff. They do not have replacement. It's just going to get terminally smaller and smaller. And then you have to then, and I tried to do this just in a very short way in the article I published, is to give some of the reasons for that. There's lots of different reasons. One of them is just modern success in terms of a post World War II modern economy, the atomization of society, the victory of capitalism in terms of the corporate victory of individualizing society and atomizing society, the birth control pill, fourth, fifth wave feminism, all of these things that have basically taken uh, the family from being the core unit of the modern state to now individuals.
And
Uh, so it's reflected in the demographics.
there is just not a single case, to my knowledge, where you have a country that breaks into the class of developed nations that doesn't also have a decline of birth rate. It's like, as soon as countries get wealthy, they also automatically have less children. And that's not only true for Europe and North America, it's also true for Japan. It's also true for China. They had a one-child policy for like 30 years because they thought the biggest problem they have is overpopulation. Turns out, oh no, now you have a problem that because you got so wealthy and people don't have children anymore, you have the opposite problem. We are really historically so bad at actually guessing, population problems. And I have other examples for that one, but there's not a single case, to my knowledge, where a country got rich and did not also have a decline in birth rate. So wealth is the main reason for the societies not having that many children anymore. But what are these people now making out of that politically, who work with these great replacement theory and so on?
Well, look, the West is a victim of its own success. As in post World War II, allowed for a massive expansion of the social security net, all of the social programs. The government was then in a position to incentivize to incentivize single mothers through various benefit schemes. And this has been proven out in a lot of work and studies in the United States from the 1960s forward. And this also had a very disastrous effect on the African American community as well. As one of the backlashes of Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society is an example. But we could go case by case in Europe, and you can kind of trace some of these things right to the present day. And you can see some of these stereotypes and were reinforced in media, television, movies, these themes of, what the future's like. This is the new culture, separating adolescents from their parents, the young from the old, and all these different compartmentalization projects, social engineering, effectively. This is the result. And we can get into the reasons why that's more beneficial for the corporate state, in terms of managing and profiting, and the interests of certain oligarchs. Certainly, we can have a discussion about that. It's maybe a different discussion, but the net result is who is going to fill? Like Britain's a good example. The expansion of the NHS. So and this is where it gets interesting. This whole immigration, right wing conversation, to expand the National Health Service after the Second World War. It required a massive infusion of cheap labor, and as well as the expansion of the London transport system, the London Underground, the post office service. All of these things, Britain drew on its colonial uh, subjects in order to do that. Even during the post-colonial period, they still had that network, and they brought them into the country to staff and to man the expansion of bureaucracy, the NHS, etc. Civil service, parts of the civil service dominated by local government, expansion of local government, dominated by certain people from certain countries, and depending on what region of Britain you're looking at. So I call that concept the colonial dividend. That's the colonial dividend. And Britain was able to do that in a very organized and deliberate way, methodical way. And it was able to then grow the state and in effect grow its GDP as well during that period, during its post-colonial period, helped in their colonial transition from colonialism to post-colonialism. But the net result of that is you have a total transformation of the color and the demographics, the tapestry of modern Britain. And that's coinciding with the victim of your own success means that the white, sort of native white population, if you will, British population, a lot of people were just able to go on social benefits for large parts of their adult life, between jobs or unemployed, single mothers, etc. And that goes into those trends that we see reinforced by government policy, which I mentioned previously. So, but the net result is a decline in families, a decline in birth rate, a decline in two-parent homes in white Britain, and ultimately a birth rate that's just fallen off a cliff and can never be recovered. So how do you fill seats in schools? How do you fill uh, just the care industry, looking after a growing, aging population? They're coming from Africa. They're coming from they're Afro-Caribbean, from Jamaica, from Barbados, from former British colonies coming to man those jobs from Nigeria, from various African countries. I mean, it's pretty clear. So those people are servicing the transformation of the demographics of Britain. And so you at some point, you realize that if institutions are funded like schools, hospitals, these massive institutions are or even the postal service, it's funded really per head. If there is if the classroom is full, their funding's there for the institution. And this goes for lots of different sectors of society. Which train stations will remain open, which will be closed, what bus routes will remain viable, which will be closed, who is going to drive the buses, etc. So if you don't have an entry-level workforce to fill those positions, then those parts of society will ultimately collapse. So you need immigration at that point to maintain that modern state structure that was erected after World War II. And corporations need also entry-level, cheap, entry-level employment. So they're big advocates. Corporations tend to be very pro-immigration. And even some of the same people that would be right-wing, they're very lax, actually, when you drill down to it on immigration policy. They like the immigration issue.
Yeah.
And so there's a major contradiction in terms of, and what I think is a lot of it is people at the very top with the money are very manipulative. They're playing both sides of the issue.
And to me, like some parts of that discussion and debate is organic, in the sense that the changing demographics is the most normal thing on earth, right? It happens in every generation that looks back and says like, oh, it was different when I was a kid, right? And then you try to grapple with these changes, and some of these discussions must be had, right? How are we staffing our positions? What are the policies? And you can see how the Japanese have similar issues. They take other approaches. They give 5-year visas and try then to send people back home and bring in new ones to make sure that they don't settle, and so on and so forth. And you could debate whether that's good or not. But I mean, part of that is organic just because of the needs of the time. But parts of it, when we look at what you researched with the connection between war and migration, seems maybe not deliberate in the sense that you want to cause this, but you do need to ask yourself: are the people who do this aware of what they're actually then causing? Because again, Gaddafi, again, this was clear. I mean, Gaddafi said, as you pointed out, we are making sure that you are not being flooded, right, with immigration. And then they took Gaddafi out, and very predictably, then you had the crisis with all of the boat people, right, that came, and then you have this large debates inside Europe. Can we drill down a little bit more into this one? Is there something that you found out that we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, there's a couple of interesting things. One of them, and this is where the similarity with the United States immigration issue comes into play.
Right.
But with Libya, after the fall of Libya, it became a failed state, and traffickers trafficking people from countries like Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea. They're coming up through that corridor through Libya, and the EU had the bright idea of paying groups in Sudan to help manage and stop the migration flows into Europe. Of course, a lot of that money ended up through the Khartoum process, they called it. It was a massive slush fund, 400 million euros. A lot of the money ends up into the hands of the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, the former Janjaweed, who are basically involved in the trafficking. So the EU is effectively paying to traffic more Africans into Europe through the EU funding, because they thought, well, this is a great idea for the bureaucrats in Brussels. We've done our bit. We've allocated the money, job done. And we're working with our partners in Africa, et cetera, and totally the opposite was the case. So I covered that in my article as well. Pretty shocking.
It's people who, when you tell them about corruption, they'll ask you, how do you spell that? It's like, what? Excuse me? It is one of these things that doesn't register in bureaucratic minds, right? That there might be people who will be allocating money that they're given to something different, and then for what it's given. But let's put that aside. So that's happening. And the way that then the Europeans try to solve that, I mean, the brilliant idea that they had is to just defund their the humanitarian border patrols, basically, that are supposed to make sure that people don't die, and then they basically said, like, no, let them drown, right? And a good part of the right actually was cheering that on. I mean, the more that end up down in the ocean, the less make it to shore, right? It's actually quite horrible when you think about it, about the cycle that this is, and the violence then done to the people who are already a subject of violence.
Yeah, and I'll talk about the boat issue because that's the main sort of poster issue that's driving the politics around this in Europe and the UK. But just on an aside, in the United States, the Democrats did have a replacement policy, which is they wanted to turn Texas Democrat. So the open border policy of Joe Biden and Obama to a degree, although Obama did a lot late in his second term to stem the tide of migration, did a lot of deportations, maybe not so much closing the border, but a lot more deportations. But so this was an important issue. But during Trump's first term, Donald Trump, during his first term, they took in an unprecedented number of Venezuelan migrants. Okay. And so the Democrats had this. Joe Biden said publicly, we want to turn Texas blue. So they looked at all these immigrants coming from Guatemala, Central America, Colombia, etc., as potential Democrat voters. And so
Which
there's
backfire big time, actually.
there's that one. But John Bolton himself is on record, as well as Trump's State Department official in charge of immigration, that they wanted outflows of migration from Venezuela, that sanctions against Venezuela were designed to create economic deprivation so that they would have those outflows of especially the working class and the intelligentsia, educated class, to come to America. So, and this was a policy under Trump. And then Trump turns around in his second term and says, oh, these are all terrorists, Tren de la Agua gangs, and we need to force deport. But he is the one who is driving the immigration. They wanted anti-Maduro people in America. And this is another concept
But
which I call...
why would you want anti-Maduro people in America rather than in Venezuela, where they could be useful to overthrow the government?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think that Venezuelan political realities in Venezuela is much more resilient than a lot of Americans realize in terms ideologically, and the Chavista movement. It's very deeply embedded, multi-generational, in fact, in Venezuelan society. But what this is called fifth column in exile, that the West have always had a strategy of absorbing a fifth column in exile, and this is the problem. This led to the weaponization of the asylum seeker. So this is when we have this split in the last 20 years of refugees and asylum seekers. So then everybody becomes an asylum seeker. And this is hugely abused. And this is another I believe an unintended consequence, is people showing up at the border undocumented. They say, where are you from? They'll say, if the U.S. is keen on regime change in Venezuela, if you say Maduro must go, immediate asylum application, fast-tracked. So you're no longer an economic migrant. And so in Europe, this was used. I'll give you an example. The socialist coup in Eritrea, and the independence of Eritrea, that there was a policy in Europe, if people from Eritrea come, fast-track them asylum. They want to absorb them into Europe, make them pro-European, pro-Western, pro-capitalist. They'll give them a lot of opportunities in academia. They did the same with Syrian refugees. You show up at Lesbos at the gates of Europe and you say, Assad must go, we're fleeing Assad, immediate asylum application. Same with Afghanistan, anti-Taliban, straight in. Undocumented, you could be Uzbek. You just say, I'm from Afghanistan and we're fleeing the Taliban. You could be from Tunisia, and many Tunisians and people from North Africa in Belgium, in France, in the Netherlands, who showed up in Greece saying that they are Syrian because they speak Arabic. So this has been abused to no end. And another example would be Afghanistan's a great example for this. Syria is a great example for this. So you can claim asylum from a war zone that is a direct result of NATO or Western foreign policy or is an Israeli aggression. But if you can identify yourself as being what the host nation wants politically, you'll get automatic asylum. So people from Eritrea are coming through to Europe. Well, you can go on Telegram forums or Facebook groups in those native languages, and they'll tell you exactly what to say, when to go, what the conditions will be like at the crossing, what documents you should have or not have with you. Okay. And so if you're from Somalia or you're from Ethiopia and you want to get into Europe, you just show up and say, I'm from Eritrea. You might be undocumented and you'll get fast-tracked asylum. Okay. And this is a documented problem with Europe. And this is the same with Syria. A lot of people came from Albania. There's a flow of Albanians into Europe after the establishment of Kosovo, who basically said there are Kosovan Albanians, but they weren't. They were just from Albania. Immediate asylum status in the UK and in Europe. And so this has been abused to no end.
Yeah, and you cannot hold it against these people, right? What they do when they're on the move and so on is you try to figure out how you get to an end where you are not in that kind of danger anymore, right? So the issue then is the policy on the other side, and of course the policies that in the first place generate those mass people's movements, right? And the movement of massive numbers of people, and we've actually there are debates about that. I mean, right when the war against Iran got off in February this year, right, March this year, there were these discussions. Oh, if Iran becomes a failed state like Libya, the millions of Iranians that will start moving toward Europe. I mean, this is a well understood phenomenon, and yet they do it all the time.
Well, with the first phase of Iranian immigration was after 1979, and so they absorbed all of the pro-royalists who fled.
Right.
And they're being used as the fifth column in exile right now. You can see it with all the influencers. And if you go to the Tommy Robinson far right UK Christian nationalist rallies, the big addition to this we saw this weekend was all of these Iranian royalist flags next to the Israeli flags. Just a sea of Iranian royalist flags, and Tommy Robinson going up and basically saying we need to install Reza Pahlavi as the legitimate leader on stage Saturday, as the legitimate leader of Iran. So these geopolitical, and you could argue whether he is controlled opposition or a tool of the state, but certainly if you follow the money, you'll see he is pushing, basically, Tommy Robinson backs every single military policy that the UK government backs, which is uncanny.
Just a tiny little question, which is kind of a sideshow. We don't have to go into it, but I just wonder about this because I genuinely do not understand why it is that the people who are rallying for a democratic Iran used Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah, saying that we need to install the son of the monarch in order to get the monarchy back, which is then a democracy. I mean, why do the alarm bells of people not go off in that quarter? I mean, this obviously, even as a narrative, is so poor, and he's such a joke as a figure. I don't understand this one.
Yeah, he's not popular. He has no base at all in Iran. I always tell people jokingly, if there was an election next month, I could probably get more votes than Reza Pahlavi in the Iranian election, if there was such a thing. But the
Why they
small
don't want an election? They just want him installed.
no,
Right?
there won't be an election. It's not going to happen. It is a joke, and it's just become a real sideshow. But it kind of exposes the shallowness and just a completely delusional the political conversation that's going on. But on the small boat issue, so just break this down by the numbers. In 2024, there were total immigrants into the UK 948,000 in total. Okay, out of that, 37,000 were from the small boats. Relatively very small percentage, but 517,000 emigrated out of the UK that year. That means the net immigration for the UK for 2024 was approximately 430,000. So let's break down that 37,000. 70% of the people on the small boats come from 5 different locations. And what are they? Syria, Afghanistan, Iran, and there's a few other, I think Albania is one of the other ones there. So basically, every single one is a place that got hit in some way or is related to a war that was initiated by NATO or is under sanctions. Okay, because you can't ignore sanctions, the economic warfare aspect of sanctions, to be a driver of economic collapse and so forth. Iraq was the fifth country in there. Iraq. So that's 70% of the people on the small boats. So you have to at some point make that connection. There's a direct, I would say, beyond correlation. I think it's causation. I think you can make a very strong argument on a lot of different levels. So the conversation with the right should be, we need to look at foreign policy. But when you look at the Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, they've got nothing to say about foreign policy other than we need to support Israel and we need to, destroy Iran. And so there's to me there's an opportunity for an intelligent wing of the right wing, which is as you said, Pascal, the Tucker Carlson type thought process of looking at the causes of immigration and then having that as the main driver of the conversation and policy. But you don't see that with a lot of the new kind of, I would call them more boutique or mem parties. They're single issue parties. And Reform in the UK, there's also Restore. They've got all these spin-offs now. They hate Muslims and they're anti-immigration. That's pretty much all they're running on. And but you're not going to get any change in the net result. So, and just beyond that, Pascal, that 948,000 total immigrants, this mostly overwhelmingly over 90% legal immigrants. They're coming through normal ports of entry, normal government processes. So the small boat issue is being used as the main driver of this entire far right movement in the UK. It's absolutely extraordinary how they managed to take that, but then not apply context to it, which to me is a missed opportunity. But there's a lot of people who don't want that conversation to happen.
No, but we've seen that also in the United States, right? The first term of Donald Trump, how he was riding on that single issue, and he was beating it like a dead horse, right? The wall. He wanted his wall. The wall would solve everything. The wall, the wall, the wall. No more immigration. The wall. Now we have a wall for what 8 years, and of course immigration isn't solved because already at the time we knew that the majority of the immigration is actually legal immigration that comes through the airports. The wall, the people who run across the border, is a minor issue in terms of impact of the entire migration to the United States. Certainly in Texas or somewhere, it might be a little bit more than in other places relatively. But so this is the normal use and abuse of the migration issue. The much more disturbing thing is, of course, as you now pointed out several times, the manufactured aspect of it, and how it is being used as a feedback loop. And
worse than that, though, it's this issue traditionally, and this isn't just recently, this is throughout history. It's always been used to divert public attention against, to channel angst away from system level perturbations like an economic collapse. And it's being used to create, you had a great guest on your program, Matthias Desmet, recently. The immigration issues is used as one of the key mass formation triggers. So this is the source of your problems and your fears, and we're going to deal with that. So everyone focus on the boats, focus on the Muslims, focus on the immigrants. And they've created a mass formation. Definitely in the UK, it's real. It's growing, and it's on the move. And it's under the guise of patriotism as well, and Christianity. This is how it's being packaged. And to me, it's just completely astroturfed. It's a billionaire funded movement from America, quite obviously. And the whole thing, I think, is it's completely artificial. It's total social engineering.
Yeah, and subliminally, you actually create even the argumentation you need for people to swallow things as horrible as genocide. Because if the link is that, look, you don't want these brown people here, we poor Israelis, we're stuck with them over here, you don't want them, so we need kind of a final solution, and we kind of have one here, you might not like it, but let's just do it and pretend that's not what's happening, and then in 10 years, the problem is solved because these people are just, they're going to have left. Nobody knows where they went. It's that sick but it's this kind of also association that's being done. And the the Netanyahu actually keeps saying, like, nobody wants the Palestinians, right? Nobody wants the Palestinians.
It's a very old framework,
Right?
though. That's a colonial. That is absolutely an archetypal colonial framework.
Mm.
And that framework exists even though we are supposedly post-colonial in the West. The framework is still there. You can just pour the new politics in there, and it flows perfectly. And then you have your recreation of something that you thought was extinct politically in
No,
Europe.
that's the joke, or that's the big trick, right? We are still deeply colonial, and actually the colonialism of the is. And I had two guests who made that point on my podcast before. Colonialism is rooted in the Crusader spirit. It's the
Absolutely.
crusading that started the whole thing, and they bumped against the wall in the east, so they actually went west. That's where it succeeded, and where genocide as an instrument of colonialism succeeded in doing what it didn't, what could do over there, and now you just try again over there. It's kind of like second, third try lucky, right? It's quite sick, and it works on a societal level, and the people do go along because you don't have a unified narrative about it.
That is one of the key mechanisms, and that is shaping today's politics. It's actually coming full circle. So that what you're talking about, the Crusades, you have had a brilliant guest on to break this down recently. I forgot his name.
Adnan Hussein made that point.
Adnan
Also,
Hussein, yes.
also Manuel Ramos, both of them independently made that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's come full circle now. And it's with the revival of Christian nationalism, but it's more of it's a superficial revival, because the reality is all these people, they're not going to church on Sundays. They identify as Christian. Okay, they identify with the Crusader iconography. Their religious experience is going to that rally every 6 months in central London. I mean, that's where they'll get their sort of. It's like a twice a year Catholic going to Christmas and Easter. It's the equivalent for this Christian nationalists. They don't actually sit in church and read the scriptures, don't study the Bible. They're nominally Christian. They're not practicing as a.
And you can see how the big Christian denominations that are actually organized religions, especially the two biggest ones, the Catholics and the Orthodox, they're not on board with that. They have completely different theology about the entire thing. It is the evangelical, it's the small churches, the relatively unrooted churches that go down that route. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, and Israel has really the Israelis are great students of Western culture and politics. They know our politics better than we do.
Because they are Western, right? They are part of us.
They are.
I mean, they're not separate. They're not Middle Easterners. I mean,
they're a Western
like
colonial,
Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, and so on.
They are a Western colonial outpost, and they look at these trends, and they're able to capitalize and actually help drive these trends. And as you said before, the connection with genocide, and you have the cognitive dissonance in the West and the lack of opposition against it, that is tapping into a deep sort of colonial DNA type of mentality of extermination of the threat to make it safe for settlers. And so this is why people support deep down subconsciously, they actually support it. Israel committing genocide in Gaza reflects Western values, unfortunately, historically. We can't deny that, even though the great and the good in Europe will, proselytize for human rights and all these great institutions, but in terms of actually following them in a real sense, there's a disconnect that's going on right now. We're seeing it. This is happening right in front of our eyes. To me, it's the most extraordinary thing, and a lot of my colleagues and people that we're confounded by this. How is this disconnect happening? And Israel and Gaza have become the real touchstone, and a lot is the revelation of the method in many ways. But it took this horrible tragedy to really reveal this deep, deep, deep-seated disconnect, this hypocrisy, and these old mindsets that are still there. They're still there, latent, clearly have always been there under the surface.
Yeah, and as a methodology, they have been implemented for by now hundreds of years. Yesterday, I tried to find out, is there somebody to speak to of the actual native people of the United States? And I was looking up the homepages of, the Navajo people, the Cherokees and the Apaches. the level of problems that they deal with on their homepages, what they talk about, what they are proud of. I think it's the Cherokees that are proud of the fact that last year they managed to expand water supply to 500 households. That's the level of things that is going on in the reservations. That is to me in the developed nations. That's something that I didn't think I would read about as an achievement. But those are the things that are going on. Those are the people who have already been successfully genocide, and that the last remnants of it, right? It's mind-boggling to me, and that those are the things that, of course, the great replacement theory and so on never ever spends even a second contemplating. And this is only 250 years old. The United States as a project is 250 years old. It's nothing. It's like, yeah, it's quite mind-boggling.
Yeah, the Native, you can learn a lot from studying the issues of Native American tribes before and today as well. I've spent a little bit of time. I've done a little bit of documentary work on reservations in the U.S. Enough to understand what the core issues are day to day. And what's interesting is they are a post-genocide population. They were given reservations that are effectively sovereign territory within the United States. However, they are dependent on external supplies,
Water.
energy, and things like this. And so, but the same techniques that the U.S. government and the European government do in funding sectarian groups in Syria or Lebanon or all these target states. They'll fund some and they won't fund the others. And that creates tension between the two. And that allows for potential destabilization and ultimately regime change. The U.S. has done this in Lebanon. You're seeing the results of this now with on the brink of a civil war in Lebanon, because the USAID has been funding Christian families and their businesses for decades, and not Shiite, and some Sunni and not others, to get pro-U.S. factions, pro-Israeli factions within Lebanese society, where the U.S. taxpayers funding that. The same thing with Indian tribes in America. The federal government will go and give money to certain parts of a tribe and not others. They'll fund certain things and not others. They're very specific and strategic in how they've been doing this to divide the Indian. In some cases, whole reservations will split over the gambling issue, the casino issue as well. This was a cause of a sort of ideological traditional versus modernity split amongst certain Native American tribes that was going to take that money from the white man or not, preserve Indian traditions and values, or bring in this new sort of Las Vegas component to the modern Indian life. And there's a big debate on both sides of that. But the net result has been, in some major tribes, like the Lakota Sioux, for instance, major split as a result of that. Plus, you have the issues of alcoholism, the fact that banks won't put branches on the reservations because there's no lending base. And so they have to cash their checks off the reservation, spend the money off the reservation. And that's how a lot of foreign countries are engineered, with sanctions, with U.S. trade agreements. All these strategies have been perfected in the United States before they were even exported as foreign policy in the 20th century.
No, this is absolutely the case. That's why it's much older than just Palestine and Gaza. It's hundreds of years by now of this methodology, of implementing it and actually, as he said, perfecting it.
But the best lab is the British Empire on this. And the Britain's oldest colony is Ireland.
Right.
Okay, so you could say Scotland, but let's just say Ireland. So there was an absolute policy of depopulating Ireland, and also to depopulate it of certain the educated class, for instance, the middle class, the upwardly mobile class. They were in a young American country at the time. American oligarchs were very happy to take that influx of cheap labor, of fairly educated immigrants into Ireland, also as well as indentured servants in the first wave during the 19th century. But they're very happy to do that. And so that suited the British and its former colony and the elites in America at the time. And Ireland went from a population of 8 million down to 3 million. It's devastating. That's to say nothing about the famine and all of these other things that happened as well. But so this is a strategy. This has been used around the world against other colonies and against other target nations, and now in the modern version through sanctions or through warfare or stoking sectarian internal civil wars and conflict. Same exact net result. And so it's a way of bleeding a country dry of its best and its brightest, and then taking that expertise. And those doctors, those sort of engineers, are now in German universities, working in German industry, and they will be very pro-German or pro-British or pro-American or Canadian, depending on where they've been repatriated. This is a kind of reverse colonial strategy, and this is a type of a weaponization of migration that's very much connected to geopolitics and specifically to foreign policy, and drill down further into the refugee versus asylum seeker mechanism in terms of bringing them into the country. And so it's like this is the displacement or the moving of people. And if you go up to the NATO and the US military planning level, if you look at full spectrum dominance, for instance, and how the Pentagon will be briefed on this by the major investment banks. A great author is Thomas Barnett you probably heard of him, from the United States. So he really pioneered that full spectrum dominance concept, and he would give presentations to the Pentagon when he was working for Cantor Fitzgerald Investments. This was right around 9/11. How are we going to move these people from Africa and move them over here? What is it going to take? And then bring in all of these different factors: war, environment, climate change, etc. But it's about taking them from the gap, what he calls the gap, to the core. The core is the advanced West. The gap is the developing world. It was all open, this is spoken of, done very openly. Mass social engineering. What are the drivers of this? NATO is a big driver of this. U.S. foreign policy. Israel has been a big driver of this. So, at some point, we can very easily connect the dots to explain why these things are happening to Europe and to the UK, to the United States, to Canada, etc. But then you can exactly see how it's being leveraged into to create political outcomes within the domestic setting of those Western countries, and specifically with driving this new far right. So I think once you can deconstruct this and look at this, and then look at history is a very important part of it. There's no better lab than the British Empire. Okay, Burma, Myanmar. You look at all these different the Biafra wars in Nigeria. I mentioned Eritrea and Ethiopia. You can just see how the geopolitics is working its way through all of these different flashpoints, and how this is servicing the host country, the core of the empire after that.
No, you're absolutely right. The only question in my mind is how much of it is actually done on the planning board by people who had a bird's eye view of what they wanted to do, and how much is, an action reaction pattern of where one thing informs the other, but at the end of the day, it's the outcome of just what empire does, right? That's just the net outflow, the net effect once you've got empire. But that's going to be a discussion for another day. I think this was a very brilliant expose of also a journalist drilling down, digging down. Patrick, once again, people who want to follow your work, where should they go?
Appreciate it. If you can, like and subscribe our YouTube channel at 21st Century Wire. I'll drop the links to you as well. Substack, Patrick Henningsen's .substack.com, and of course 21stcenturywire.com. That's our kind of main hub, our main platform as an independent media platform. We've been going since 2009.
I will try to make sure that all of the links are in the description box below. If we can also publish this talk as a collaboration, so people can click on your YouTube channel and subscribe. Definitely. There. Please remind me to do that in case I forget. But I try not to. Patrick Henningsen, thank you so much for your time today.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Pascal.